What is going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with a Monday Night Football preview for the Draftkings Showdown slate between the Saints and the Buccaneers. Should be a fun, competitive divisional matchup between two defensive teams, and over the years, we've had some classics when these two have matched up on prime time. The Saints pulling off upsets over the last few years. The Buccaneers, led by Tom Brady, having last-second winning drives. We're probably going to get spoiled a little bit tonight as well. And from the DFS angle, a lot to consider. A lot of 3-3 scripts, perhaps a 4-2 for either side. That's going to be the chalk. If you're looking to be a little contrarian, well, then take an onslaught. But I'm certainly with Vegas, with most of the population out there, expecting this to be an absolute banger. So a lot to consider, some injuries that are still up in the air as well. So a lot to touch on. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocked. As we typically do here, we'll talk about the game script before we go through my projections and talk about each player. So it got a relatively low total. It was at 41.5 the last time I saw, with the Buccaneers being a slight favorite with a 3-point spread. All of that I tend to agree with. I think that Tom Brady tends to get hot this time of year. He elevates his play when he has to, and over the last few weeks, the Buccaneers have been a lot more efficient on the ground, and that has led to a lot of success through the air, especially with play action for Tom Brady. So with Leonard Fournette coming back, getting back to full steam, he's practiced all 3 days this week. Still technically questionable, but I am expecting him pretty much 100% to be active tonight. And even if he isn't active, Rachaad White has been a standout of his own, and that's why Tom Brady has opened up the offense a little bit with the play action, and why I think that they'll find some success tonight. So low total, right? Just a 3-point spread towards the Buccaneers. Outside of Leonard Fournette, you do have Russell Gage, who's also questionable, did miss last week, $4,600, and Cameron Brate for the Buccaneers. He's there at $3,000. This technically their tight end one, but Kadon has also played plenty of snaps over the last month or so. So if Brate isn't able to go, Kadon would be stepping in. Russell Gage, you'd see a lot of snaps for somebody like a Scotty Miller in that sort of circumstance. Perhaps a few more for Brashad Perriman as well, if somebody like a Russell Gage doesn't suit up. And, with Leonard Fournette, it's a pretty one-to-one little comparison there to a Rachaad White. Now let's go player by player. So just all of the, stuff that we have to handle out of the way. Chris Godwin is the most expensive player on the board at $10,600. And in a low-scoring, competitive matchup, a lot of times your PPR monsters, the guys that are usage monsters, are the players that you want to target because there's not quite as much touchdown equity, not as much, 40, 50 play yard upside. So guys like a Godwin who do a lot more of their damage with, 7, 8 reception games, don't post, 200 yard receiving yard games very often, but will nickel and dime you down the field, are a lot more attractive than they would be in a higher game script, where maybe a Mike Evans, who has that deep play threat, a lot more touchdown upside, is the guy you're looking for in more of a higher scoring game. So I think the game script plays into Chris Godwin's lap. That's why even at $10,600, I do see myself playing him at the captain slot, even though he's costing you an arm and a leg, right? That's a lot to invest into a captain. But you have to remember, there's a lot of slates where our top end players are like $12,000, right? 11.5 at the very least. I think 10.6 is more than okay. It's more than reasonable for somebody up top, particularly in this sort of game script. You have both quarterbacks here, so I'm going to handle them together. $10,400 for Brady. On the other side, you have Andy Dalton at $9,000. Now, the issue with them at captain is, of course, the lack of rushing upside. I mean, Tom Brady's pretty much non-existent. He could get you that 1-yard touchdown on the goal line, I suppose. But Andy Dalton, same sort of story, right? He's a little bit more mobile, a little bit younger than a Tom Brady, but you're not going to see Dalton go for more than 25, maybe 30 rushing yards at the very most. And that would be if there's a complete breakdown on the defensive side and Andy Dalton just runs free, that sort of thing on a third down. So they're not going to get you any sort of 40, 50 yard game. They're not going to score multiple touchdowns on the ground, which I think really limits their upside at the captain slot. And when we're dealing with just a 41-point total, it's not like either quarterback is implied to go out there and throw 3, 4 touchdowns like you need to get to a ceiling performance. So Tom Brady, Andy Dalton, I'm okay with them. more than okay with them at the flex spot. Just not so thrilled with the captain exposure because both of them are getting ownership, right? Tom Brady nearly 17% at captain. Andy Dalton down here is only 6%, but that's still pretty, sizable, right? When you compare him to a Fournette, who's projected for less ownership at captain, Rashad White, who's projected for less, and pretty much the rest of the board below that. So those are going to be fades at captain, but I'm still okay with them at flex. Something to consider as well is anytime you're playing a quarterback in Showdown, I'd highly recommend making sure you're playing at least one receiver or tight end from that team. For one of these passing heavy quarterbacks to get there once again, without that rushing upside, they're going to have to link up with somebody to get that production, whether it's a touchdown or a bunch of yards. So you're going to want to have at least one bring along with those quarterbacks. Alvin Kamara doesn't have an injury designation, which is great. He's had one for seemingly the entire year. He's 10 grand, and anytime he's on a Showdown slate, he's going to be one of, if not the highest owned captain that I'm getting to, and that is the case tonight. For my Saints heavy lineups, he's going to be by far the most prominent figure there. I'm mixing in a Chris Olave. There's a few other guys I'm considering, like a Jarvis Landry, who's going to be a little bit more lower exposure for me. But a majority of my lineups where I'm taking, a Saints side are going to be heavily featured with an Alvin Kamara. He not only brings PPR upside, but he's going to give you plenty of production on the ground. With players like an Ingram that have been injured, you've seen Kamara just get so much usage there. I mean, they've mixed in a Taysom Hill, but it's pretty much been, jobs 1, 2, and 3 all to Alvin Kamara there, with no one else really getting much usage to speak of, which is what you love, right? Especially in a Showdown. In a lower scoring game, much like a Chris Godwin, he's kind of that nickel and diming sort of player that can get you those little dump offs, can get you that rushing usage there. And, in the red zone, brings even more upside than a Chris Godwin. So I absolutely love him here. I'm going to have a little bit, I'd say I'm favoring the Buccaneers. I might have like 60% of my lineups with a Buccaneers heavy stack with like a 4-2 or a Buccaneer captain and a 3-3. And like 40% are going to be New Orleans led lineups, right? Whether it's like a 4-2 or Saint at captain. But a majority of those will have Kamara as the featured player. Next up, we've got Mike Evans, who I'm still okay with, right? The game script kind of favors a Godwin, but he can still score you 2 touchdowns, has that upside, is a little bit lower owned at captain than a Godwin, and is, a little bit cheaper, right? Only $1,000 cheaper, which is saving you a whole $1,500 at the captain slot. So I like all of those things, but I still do prefer Godwin there. Chris Olave, now I'm okay with it because of his PPR upside. I really like him at the flex spot because he's a little bit cheaper. It's hard to jam in 4 of the guys up top, right? That's almost all of your salary right there, particularly if one of them's at captain. Whereas if you take maybe 2, 3 of them, if you're really pushing it, of those guys there in the 9 and 10K range, Chris Olave is a solid 3rd or 4th man in. He's, a little bit cheaper. He gives you that flexibility to go from like a pure punt play at the bottom to maybe one of these mid-tier range value options. So brings that utility to the board. And kind of like Godwin's going to nickel and dime you through the air, right? If there's like a slot receiver on the Saints team, it's Olave even at his young age. And at 13.4 projected points, he's also one of the better points per dollar plays on the slate, especially of the mid-tier range. You can see Tom Brady projecting for 1.8x value, but he's a quarterback. We usually expect that. In terms of your skill position players, he's up there with, I guess, a Rashad White, right? A lot of that's due to the injury concern to a Leonard Fournette. In terms of your points per dollar value. So definitely somebody I'll be getting to. Leonard Fournette, I'm expecting him to play. Like I said, he's practiced all 3 days this week, or at least on the activity report, was listed as a full participant. $7,400 for Lenny. I mean, even with the emergence of Rashad White, it's just way too cheap. So if he plays, especially if we get word that he's full capacity, which might end up being the case, he might be your best play on the slate. So if you're looking to try and stack the Tampa Bay side, I mean, obviously Godwin makes sense, Mike Evans as well. But Leonard Fournette, especially because I only have him at 5% ownership right now, which will go up, once he's confirmed to be active, might end up being the best captain to get to on that side. So maybe rather than taking a lot of Mike Evans and a Chris Godwin, maybe I just take Chris Godwin shares, and then the rest of my Tampa Bay exposure at captain might be Leonard Fournette, especially if the ownership stays low. So, as per usual, guys, these projections are just the early ones I'm running here on a Monday. If you want access to them as they change throughout the day, direct access to use them in your optimizers, your DFS process, make sure to check out the Patreon. There's a link in the description of the video. And by the end of the day, you'll be able to see where I'm at in terms of that captain exposure. But as of right now, I like all three as options. We'll just have to see what I end up fitting into my actual exposure. Moving into the value tier, Rachaad White, I mean, if Fournette's out for whatever reason, I mean, White is a smash play as well. Even if Fournette plays, I think Rachaad White is playable. You can see I have him projected for 11 points, actually more than Fournette right now. Once Fournette is confirmed active, that will flip-flop. You'll see a higher projection on Fournette than you will see on Rachaad White. But White will still project for 10 plus fantasy points. Still a solid value for his price tag. Taysom Hill, though, I like getting to. He's the Swiss Army knife. Always going to be way lower owned than he should be for Showdown. And if there's one format where like Taysom Hill is like one of the more attractive options on, is Showdown, because we always expect madness, chaotic things to happen in a one game sample size. And there's no better player than a 10% owned Taysom Hill to do that. So whether it's throwing a touchdown, running like a 60-yard touchdown, which he seemingly does like once a month, that sort of thing, I like the upside that he brings at low ownership. Jarvis Landry, a little bit more feasible at captain, though. You know, Taysom's going to do it in one play, right? He's going to get you that huge play upside. Jarvis Landry, another player that can nickel and dime you. PPR receiver. I mean, before Chris Olave came along, that's who he was for this team. But let's say maybe Olave gets a little bit more attention from the Bucs secondary, which is depleted. They are dealing with a lot of injuries over there on the Buccaneers side. Maybe Jarvis Landry, if they're paying too much attention to Olave, is the one that goes off. You've seen it a few times this year. I mean, Jarvis Landry, they're paying him a lot of money to play wide receiver over there for the New Orleans, and they still have Michael Thomas. I mean, their wide receiver room is stacked. You know, if you're the future quarterback of the Saints, who I think they might get a little bit of attention in the free agent market, they're going to have a lot of targets to go after, a lot of weapons to utilize, and Jarvis Landry could get there too, and he's super cheap, right? At the captain, he's $7,800. He's feasible. If Russell Gage plays, which I think he most likely will play, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. He's definitely a good value at $4,600. If he doesn't play, right, we got to consider guys like a Scotty Miller, who's $600. I mean, even a Brashad Perriman down here at $200 might even be in consideration if somebody like Gage gets rolled out. So we'll keep an eye on that. Ingram hasn't seen that many touches. I don't love that, but he could get in the end zone. You never know. The kickers are solid on a low-scoring slate, like getting there. I do like the defenses. So from the projection standpoint, nearly 8 projected points for the Buccaneers. That's top notch for a defense. Nearly 6 for the Saints defense is also pretty solid from the defensive perspective. I just think they're going to be over-owned. You can see right now the ownership projections aren't reflecting that, but based on the low scoring script, a lot of the content I've seen around the industry, I think they're going to come in higher owned than at least my algo is telling me right now. So that's another ownership spot to keep an eye on throughout the day. If they stay like 20% owned, 15% owned for the Saints, yeah, I'll buy in. I'll play them in 30, 35% of lineups. But I have a hard time believing that's going to happen. I'll just say that right now, right? I make, projections change. They get more mature throughout the day. That's just a lean that I think is going to happen. And if that's the case, yeah, I'll probably stay away. But you never know. Maybe they stay lower owned. I would love to see that by the end of the day, but we don't know. Tre'Quan Smith, if you're looking for a big play wide receiver, $2,600, you could get there. He's 5 times lower owned than Rashid Shaheed, who wasn't even active the last time out. So obviously if people are going to get to somebody that's not going to be active in Shaheed, then you want to play Tre'Quan Smith. But they might end up making Shaheed active. Last time out, it was Kevin White that was active. So he's $200. He's questionable. There's a good chance that even if he's he could play, they're going to end up rolling him out just because I think a healthy Shaheed's probably a better player anyways. So he might end up being active tonight, but either way, I'd probably rather get to a Tre'Quan Smith. I'd rather spend the $1,200 to get to somebody who's 5 times less owned, isn't going to play more snaps. Maybe he doesn't have the 80-yard touchdown upside of a Shaheed, but still, I like the ownership there. I love, these value picks when they're sub 5%. And a sub 2% Tre'Quan Smith is just too much to pass up for me. Marquez Callaway, another receiver to keep an eye on. He's at least been active for most of the year, but he's a pure punt, right? I'm not going to be playing him in more than 1, maybe 2 lineups. And pretty much the same thing here with Scotty White and Kevin White. Now, Kevin White very likely might not be active, so we'll have to see. If he's rolled out, like I said, there's a few other options on that team I might consider. If you're looking at pure punts, we mentioned Perriman's utility if Gage is rolled out. Giovanni Bernard, I don't even know if he's going to be active for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers tonight, but with, Rashad out there, I mean, he hasn't even been playing that much. Keyshawn Vaughn's actually played more than Bernard. Keyshawn Vaughn's actually involved with the run game and the run blocking game of Tampa Bay. Bernard hardly even sees the field. So, I mean, if you're going to take a pure punt running back for the Buccaneers, I guess, $200 for Vaughn, who we've seen go for like 50, 60-yard touchdowns before, isn't the craziest thing. But outside that, I mean, at least without the injury news at this point of the day, it's hard to say. So keep an eye on it. If Brate is knocked out, Ko Kieft could end up playing tight end for Tampa Bay as their number 2 tight end behind Cade Otton. And much like Cade Otton is still scoring points here over the last few weeks as the backup tight end, Kieft at $400 could also get you 2-3 catches and get there in that sort of format too. So a lot of this is coming down to injury. The main ones to keep an eye on are Brate and Gage. I do expect Fournette to be active, but if for some crazy reason is out, Rachaad White becomes one of the best plays on the slate. So, a few moving parts that we could see throughout the day. But outside of that, a slate that should be competitive, right? A relatively low scoring game. Just make sure that you're correlating your lineups. You're playing them with a game script in mind. I'm going to have scripts that are favoring both teams, but they're all going to be within a 4-2 of either side. I'm not going to have any 5-1s, even my 4-2s. I'm going to be careful about that. I really think that a 3-3 is probably what ends up winning this sort of slate. Just when there's so low touchdown equity, you got to get those PPR points. That's really when it comes down to in the running backs, right? The high usage running backs like a Kamara just become almost must plays, almost locks on this sort of slate. And I would say that about Fournette in the past, but now with White in the fold, it's not nearly as sure of a prospect, but definitely those PPR wide receivers. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to make some lineups for this divisional showdown, and one that should be a lot of fun to watch as a third-person bystander, right? Obviously sweating out our DFS lineups, but I couldn't imagine if I was one of the 2 teams in contention there. I mean, 2 teams that have been underperforming, but in that division, right, might end up making the playoffs regardless. So should be a lot of heavy hitting, a lot of bad blood out there on the field, and one that I'm excited to see for sure. So best of luck tonight, guys. Before we hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any of our content in the future. And let's go out there and take home a GPP tonight, fellas. Well, that would be a pretty damn nice way to start this week. Without further ado, guys, like I said, best of luck, and let's get this cash.